Hello, everyone. My name is Diana Britton Thompson, and I'd like to welcome you to the key to turning your child's behavior into opportunities. Before we begin, I invite you to put in the chat box the age of the child or the children who've inspired you to be here today, and any specific concerns that you might have. These could be things like lack of focus, depression, social anxiety, quick to anger, whatever concern that you have about this child or the young children in your life. And I will try to address that along the way. Someone's already asked about tools for a teenager. And even though many of the examples that I use in this program will sound like they're for younger children, I have worked extensively with teenagers and even adults, and I can share with you at the end how to adapt some of these tools. They still apply, I just take a slightly different approach. So I find that a computer screen and a webinar is a terribly impersonal way to connect with people. So I will invite you along the way to put in the chat box messages to me. It might be things that resonate with you in the webinar, questions that you might have. And then at the end, I'll also ask you to share your questions that you've had along the way. So let's begin. The key to turning your child's behavior challenges into opportunities. I'll begin the presentation with a story about the youngest or the toughest child in class. This was early in my career, and at that point, he was the most difficult student that I'd ever worked with. His name was Jeremy, and he was quick to anger. He would draw everyone's attention in class towards him. It was very hard to run a class. It was so difficult that other teachers in this summer camp that we were working in did not want to work with him. And I like the tough kids. They tend to have a lot of energy. They tend to have a lot of leadership potential. And if they have intense emotions, I like to work with them to channel that towards problem solving. So the first day of class, I asked Jeremy and all of the other students to draw a picture of how they saw themselves. Now, this is not like the image they see in the mirror. This is a symbol that represents who they are. So one little girl drew this beautiful picture of a flower, but Jeremy, he took a magic marker, and this is what he did. He just scribbled it on the page. And over the next 3 weeks in this class, we worked on identifying students' assets. What are they good at? What are their skills? And that could be skills like creativity and imagination. And then we looked at the challenges they had, maybe the emotions that created problems for them. And then we looked at how to take their assets and use their assets to create strategies to turn their liabilities into assets. So how can you use your creativity to transform that anger into powerful problem solving? So at the end of this 3 weeks, I asked the students again to draw a new picture of themselves, but this time it was a picture that represented who they were becoming and who they could be by transforming their liabilities into assets. So the little girl who drew this flower took her piece of paper and she filled the page with flowers. It was a beautiful garden. And Jeremy just sat and he stared at the scribble he put on the page for the longest time. And I offered him a new sheet of paper and he didn't want it. And after a while, this is what he drew. He filled the empty spaces. And this was a drawing that represented his potential, the possibility of who he could become. And he had a tool and some practice on becoming the person he wanted to be. This is what I call identity shaping. And if you've never heard that term, congratulations, you're coming straight to the source, because that's my term. And I've been working on developing this technique for identity shaping for more than 30 years. So if you have the cheat sheet that was offered to you when you signed up for the webinar, grab it. If you don't, it's not a problem. You can just grab a pencil or paper if you have it. Or if not, just recognize that this is important information for you to have. What is the key to maximizing a child's potential? That is identity shaping. This is a technique and an approach to building confidence, building skills, and building a child's potential so that they have greater access to it. And it's not something that I have seen in other programs, and it's something that I wanted, honestly, for myself. So I've been developing this for more than 30 years. Think about this. If you were to ask your young person, a child or a teenager, if you were to ask this person right now, who are you? What would they say? Well, if they are like any one of the thousands of children that I've worked with, you're likely to get one of three answers. The first one might be from a young child or a kid with a big imagination. And for that child, they are no longer limited by the restraints of reality. Well, they can be anything and anybody. A young child might say something like, I'm a dinosaur, or I'm a princess, or I'm a princess dinosaur. They are not withheld by any limitations of reality. But older kids, they understand more of the world. So they are likely to give one of two responses. One is they will stare at you, having no idea why you've asked this question, because nobody's ever asked this question and they've never even thought about it. And why are you asking this? Or they will identify with what their skills or interests are. So it might be, I'm a gamer, I'm a soccer player, I'm a dancer. They identify with their interests, but those interests can change. And so their identity is not rooted into something that really builds long-term identity. Now, if you have struggled to help your child find confidence or manage strong emotions in the past, this is not your fault, because the emotional training tools of the past were not made for the challenges of today. Think about it. A child or teenager, any young person who has a phone in their hand has an emotional trigger that is available to them 24 hours a day. That was not an issue when I was a child. I didn't have those kinds of emotional triggers. So whatever emotional training we had in the past doesn't apply to the challenges that children face today. And if you have found that reward and punishment techniques don't work for long, you are absolutely right, because we have now learned that reward and punishment, carrot and stick approach to teaching is the least effective long-term technique for learning. It is an emotional manipulation very often that is meant to control a child's behavior, and it only addresses the symptom, not the problem, because very often we think the symptom is the problem, and that is often just the behavior. And if you have been frustrated with parenting books, blogs, and podcasts in the past, you are not alone, because these standalone tips and tricks manage very specific issues, but they are not designed as a system of long-term skills building. You might have noticed that these tips and tricks will only last for a short period of time. Parents, teachers, young people need a system for creating personalized systems to address personal issues. Okay. And if you think there's another way, you are absolutely right. With a holistic system of skills building and identity shaping, you can develop advanced skills while building a strong and lasting connection with your child. I feel very strongly about not wasting your time, so I'm going to start off telling you exactly who this program and who this webinar is not for. If you are looking for just a quick fix it and forget it approach, this is not for you. This is really designed for long-term systemic empowerment and change, and nothing like that can happen quickly. It can happen within a month or just a few weeks, but it doesn't happen with a very quick fix it and forget it approach. If you are only concerned about discipline, this is not for you, because we are really geared towards producing big results that last long term. And if you prefer to ignore problems, there's no shame in that. There are a lot of people who do, but in this program, with this approach, we hit problems head on. So I'll tell you who this program is for. This is for anyone who has a young, very important person in their life. You see your child's behavior causing problems, and it might not be their behavior, but their response to challenges. These issues might happen at home, at school, on the playground, on a sports team. It might affect their grades. And you want your young person to have what they need to be happy, healthy, and successful on their terms, to be resilient, growth-minded, and confident. And it's so hard as parents, grandparents, or other concerned adults to see children suffer, and we want to be able to do something. This is for you. This is to give you the tools to help them. If you're willing to do something that you've never done before to get results that you've never had, taking on a system that will give you a very specific approach instead of just winging it, this is for you. Okay, my goal from this class is to introduce identity shaping to you, what it is, why it's important, and how it can empower your child. I'll show you how identity shaping is different from other skills development, but it is the foundation for all other skills. And I'll show you which are the most important skills for building self-control, confidence, and a young person's potential. And I will show you why this program has been endorsed by one of the top psychologists in the world today. Again, my name is Diana Britton Thompson, and I've worked with thousands of children, parents, teachers, teens, young adults for over 30 years. Building life skills through identity shaping is absolutely my passion and my life's work. I've done this in schools where I would go in and provide the training. I've done this in workshops and camps. I've done this through a children's museum, through other museums, the Museum of Nature and Science. I've done this at gifted schools. I've done it at very expensive private schools and in high-risk communities. I've worked with a wide range of young people, and always I am focused on building skills. I've gone into conferences, training educators and parents, and I've even gone into schools where the entire school population is trained in this program. Every student is trained over the course of a year. The teachers are trained, they integrate it into their school curriculum. They have a year-long curriculum, once a week activities to do to build skills, to build a heroic problem-solving community. They would even have, instead of timeout, a power station to really give kids a place to go to work on problem solving. And parent-teacher trainings where they have real hands-on experience. So today, I am going to share with you 3 different secrets. And the first secret is how to easily help your children create the person they want to become using the same tools that an actor uses to create a role for the stage. I'll begin by telling you how I came to this work. When I was 14 years old, I was sitting in a circle, a group of my peers that I was meeting for the first time. And the assignment was just to go around the circle saying our name and where we were from. And this was exactly the kind of activity I despised more than anything, because all eyes were on me. And when it came my turn, I just impulsively said, I'm nobody from nowhere. And then wanted everybody's attention to just move on. And I discovered I was not alone, because by the time everyone had gone around in the circle, there were 3 other young people who identified as a nobody from nowhere. And that was the first time I realized I was not the only one who felt that way. And we formed the Nobody Club. Our motto over time became nobody is somebody. And it was funny because starting off with that identity of being a nobody gave me an unusual community. And that club continued for about 3 years, and I'm still in touch with those friends today. But I felt terribly invisible. And what I discovered is not only were there other young people in that group many years ago, but in the years that I've worked with young people since, this is a very common experience. Even the kids who are popular, they seem confident, they still have this sense, this insecurity where one wrong moment, one bad day can make them feel like they are nobody, and their self-esteem can very easily crash, because oftentimes it's based on circumstances and their position in the group. And if that changes, it can absolutely impact their self-image. I went from feeling like a nobody using these techniques to being an author of 18 books and 4 full curriculums in skills development, to being an award-winning speaker. I've done a TEDx, but in 2017, I competed in the World Championship of Public Speaking. Out of 30,000 contestants, I placed in the top 20. And my work in identity shaping and skills development has been endorsed by Dr. Philip Zimbardo. He is the former president of the American Psychological Association, and he was the creator of the Stanford Prison Experiment. And if you are not familiar with this experiment, I encourage you to go take a look on the internet, or there's even at least one movie on Netflix about it. It's very difficult to watch, but it really is a wonderful example of how circumstances can change an otherwise healthy person's identity very quickly. Okay, before I go to the next part of the webinar, I'm going to invite you to put in the chat box anything that's resonated with you so far, questions that you might have. And if you haven't already, share with me what concern that you might have for a young person in your life. Okay, so I will share with you the story of the smallest kid on the playground. McGregor was the smallest 6-year-old you have ever seen. Mentally, he was really developing quickly. He was a smart kid. He caught on things very quickly. He learned very fast, but he looked more like a 3-year-old. Developmentally, physically developmentally, he was slow. And this caused him to be the target of a lot of teasing. And on the playground, they like to call him a baby. And sometimes he would get stressed, he would get overwhelmed, he would have accidents, which of course made it worse. And children believe what their peers tell them. They will believe if someone says something to them with strong conviction because they have no reason not to believe it. So when other kids would tell McGregor, "You're a baby," he believed them and he would cry and he would just say, "I'm not a baby." Well, I worked with him on creating this empowered identity outside of the pressures of the situation so that he could build that confidence to take with him. And we practiced. I asked him to draw a picture of himself as if he were strong and he could take on anything. And he drew this picture of a giraffe. A few days later, I am on the playground and I overhear one of the children teasing him and calling him a baby. And he turned around and he said, "I'm not a baby. I am tall giraffe McGregor." And I was so excited. I ran over to him and I whispered in his ear, "I am so proud of you." And he looked at me and he was so confused and he said, "I didn't do it for you," which made me even more proud because he wasn't doing it for validation. He wasn't doing it for attention. It really was him finding his voice and speaking up in the moment. And I was really glad he wasn't doing it for me. So if you have your cheat sheet, pull it out. If you don't, just take notes or listen. There are 3 ways that identity is developed. It's developed from the inside, from a child's nature. They might be naturally shy. They might have emotions that are really strong, like Jeremy in the beginning, or when I was a 14-year-old, I was very shy. So that's one way that identity is developed. And some parents will look at their children and say, "What did I do wrong? Why are they like this?" But sometimes it is just their nature. It's just the feelings that come from the inside. And sometimes it comes from the outside, what other people say to them. And it's one of the reasons that bullying is so destructive for children, because it can so easily shape a child's identity. And third, identity comes from a child's experiences and then their interpretations to that experience and then what they do. So the example in my case, when I said I was shy, so I said I was a nobody from nowhere. That was my interpretation. And then what I did with it was to create a community. But through that community, there was a transformation that happened because we joked about not wanting to be nobodies. And we each began looking for ways to be somebody in different directions. So for me, I went into a theater class and I discovered that I could use the same tools and techniques that an actor uses to create a role for the stage to become the person that I wanted to be. So how do all of these stories apply to you? Well, it is easy to assume that if we are close to a child, that they will tell us what's going on. They'll tell us if they're feeling insecure. They'll tell us if they feel like a nobody. They'll tell us if they've had a really, really, really hard day. But that's not always the case. My mother had a master's degree in psychology. She was working on her PhD in education when I was 14. And we were very, very close. But I didn't tell her how I felt because I didn't have the words to express it. And I didn't think it was important. It just seemed like it was my problem and I needed to fix it. So I didn't have the words to talk about it. And she didn't even know to ask because I had a couple of friends. My grades were okay. It didn't seem like I was in a crisis. So just because we think our kids are okay doesn't mean they don't have other issues that are going on inside. Children can feel like a nobody and try to hide it, or they can have other issues and hide it. Last week, a friend of mine has a 15-year-old daughter, and this friend went out of town for a couple of days, and her daughter was excited to just have a couple of days in the house alone by herself. Friday, this child had a very difficult day at school, and fortunately, she contacted her mother, who quickly discovered that her child was in a very serious mental health crisis. They did not see it coming before the parents left for 2 days, and I was able to step in and help manage the situation until we could get this child into a safe place. But obviously, there were challenges that were happening with this child that the parents didn't know about until she was in a very serious crisis. Negative feelings and experiences can affect a child's behavior. This 15-year-old that I was helping last week, I would have told you she was an absolutely stable young person. Something happened and she was at risk of self-harm. And it's common to deal with behavior, the symptoms, and not recognize the real problem. The real problem could be these other things that are going on inside of children that are driven by their emotions and their inability to really process them. So we'll talk some more about that in a moment. As I mentioned, I came to this work through theater. People often assume that because my work moves into this identity, it moves into some mental health and skills development, that I must have a background in therapy or psychology. And I believe that that is really important work. I'm not here to diminish the role that therapists and psychologists take, but I take a different approach. And I look at identity and skills building and emotions from the inside out, as opposed to a therapeutic or an educational approach from the outside in. And taking it from the inside out is deeply personal, and it connects with moving past this intellectual approach. And for young person, I found it's really how they learn. I've started doing it in my career with play building, helping kids to explore who they want to be and putting them in theater situations that are safe and fun so they can really play around with that and find a character that has that level of confidence and then experiment with bringing it into the real world. And this is not like a fake it till you make it approach. This is a try it and experiment with it until you create it approach. And it is an ongoing process. It's not something that you do and you check off the list. It's a part of our growth process. And if we can teach this to children or to young people, they have a greater chance for growing as the needs and the demands on them increase. So pull out your cheat sheet, write this down, or just listen up. Which 3 tools do children use in early childhood that are similar to what actors use to create a role for the stage? First is role play. When we watch young children do pretend play, they cast themselves in roles. They'll cast themselves as the princess, the superhero, the villain, the dinosaur. They cast themselves. But what we don't realize is that we continue casting ourselves in roles in adulthood, not just in the situations that we put ourselves in or the roles that we play as a parent, as a teacher, in our jobs, but the roles that we play that go beyond that, whether we play the victim, the villain, the sidekick. We also use imagination and pretend in early childhood, and actors use this as well. Einstein said his imagination had done more for him than his ability to retain knowledge, because we have to have this ability to imagine the possibilities before we can begin to create them. But too often, as adults, we imagine that imagination and pretend are the tools of childhood, and as adults, We simply don't need them anymore. But they are so important and a critical element in any problem-solving approach. Next are scripts. You might not think of scripts typically as being a part of not only, well, I'm sorry, let me back up. In early childhood, we start with scripts with a 3-year-old who says, why? But why? But why? And as adults, we say, because I said so, because I'm the grown-up. These are scripts that we just naturally use. And we start using these scripts as young children. Actors use them, and as adults in the real world, we use scripts too. And we have scripts that play in our heads. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. Nobody likes me. I'm the victim. I'm the villain, whatever. So these are all things that apply in young childhood, in theater, and in life. Okay. You've heard me mention heroes a number of times, and I realize everyone has their own perception of what a hero is. There was a young child whose family just signed up for the program, and when the mom told him he was a hero, he said, I'm not a hero, I'm a real person. So I have an expanded definition of what a hero is. A hero is anyone who solves a problem or they're working on solving a problem. Now that can be anyone from a pretend superhero battling an intergalactic alien to a teenager trying to get out of bed in the morning. Both of those demand superhuman strength. And anytime any one of us is in the process of trying to solve a problem, we can claim the role of a hero. Leaders guide and inspire others, because when heroes are in the process of solving a problem and they're committed to it, they're automatically assuming the role of a leader and they become role models. And a champion is a hero who is overcoming their obstacles. And for each obstacle they overcome, there's another one that comes next. And it's a little bigger and then a little bigger. And this can go on for life, but that's how we expand our potential. When we can solve smaller problems, we're building muscles that help us solve bigger problems and bigger problems and bigger problems until we can face the challenges that a changing world are presenting. This is the story of a student who had a lot of social anxiety. She was so afraid of making a mistake, of being embarrassed, of saying the wrong thing, that she wouldn't talk to people in class. She would never raise her hand in class. That was terrifying to her. And whenever it came her turn in class, I could see her having a mild panic attack. And one day, after being in my class for several months, she came running into my class and she said, she had the most amazing dream, because this anxiety in her daytime experience had often transferred into her dreams. And she had this reoccurring nightmare where she would have this anxiety attack that she was making a mistake in front of her peers. But the night before, she had the same dream, but this time it was different. This time, she was standing in front of the class. She was feeling this experience of panic wash over her. And suddenly she thought to herself, wait a minute, this is a problem. And I'm a hero. It's just a problem and I know what to do. And she changed that into a lucid dream where she took control of her dream. Now, I've only had that experience maybe 3 to 5 times in my entire life. And this child was in 4th grade. So I was so inspired by this because I thought, if she is looking at her identity and the process of problem solving in her subconscious when she's dreaming, then what can she do in real life? You see, identity is a subconscious experience. And my approach is to take that subconscious experience and transform it into a conscious one. It's so difficult to see our young people suffer, and we want so much to help them. And the world is changing. And so the tools that we learned for helping young people may not apply as easily. And I'm just going to share with you a couple of statistics. In 2007, so that was a long time ago, before many of the children that you're concerned about were even born, there was an extensive research project that was done through the National Research Council and Institute of Medicine. It was at that point the largest research study that of its kind. And they found that 20% of children living in the United States, up to 1 in 5 children, had a mental health disorder. Now, there have been smaller studies that have said it may be 1 in 4, it may be 1 in 3, but that was the first time that we really realized that children are faced with a mental health crisis. And that was years ago. Now, when they say a mental health disorder, it could be ADD, ADH, depression, autistic spectrum disorders. It could be any one of those things that might be temporary issues, or if they go unaddressed, they can become lifelong issues. During the pandemic, 22% of all parents with children ages 5 to 12 said their children showed elevated symptoms of depression, anxiety, and psychological stress. And they experienced a worsened mental or emotional health. For those of you who've said you've had teenagers, I just want to welcome you and give you some sense of comfort that though your child is struggling, they are not alone. Just like the 15-year-old that I was fortunate enough to help this last weekend, this was an otherwise very stable child. The experiences of the last year and a half, 2 years have really destabilized otherwise very healthy children, kids who have otherwise stable situations, but they are in a world that is so constantly changing that creates a lot of instability, especially for teenagers who are looking ahead to their future. What happens when they get out of high school? Okay. I am going to ask if you can see how this approach of identity shaping and skills development can make a difference in a child's life. You can just put yes in the chat box. It just helps me to know that I am communicating effectively. Okay. What we used to do was to believe that reward and punishment was best for controlling kids. And it can in the moment, but it can also have long-term consequences because kids will rebel. They will rebel against this carrot and stick approach. We used to micromanage kids, thinking that's what they needed to succeed. But what they need are these skills so that they can manage themselves. And we assume that if we were close to kids, that they would tell us anything, but now they might be telling their followers on some social media platform, complete strangers. We used to ignore problems and let kids figure it out on their own. There was a mom who shared with me that she followed this parenting technique of sending kids in, her 2 boys into the other room to let them work out their problems on their own. And there was a long-standing parenting technique that if you just give kids the space, they will learn problem-solving skills. But she discovered over time that her two boys were fighting more often. They didn't like being together. It was more difficult at the dinner table. And so she listened in on one of these problem-solving sessions that they were having, and she discovered that her younger son was bullying the older child. And the younger kid figured he had it all figured out because he was getting what he wanted. That was the problem-solving technique that he was learning. He was learning how to be aggressive and assertive and bully someone to get what he wanted. And as far as he was concerned, that was working just fine. But it didn't work for the big picture. So we can't just assume that letting kids figure it out on their own, that they will figure it out effectively. We used to think that emotions were not important. And in fact, it wasn't until 1997 that the term emotional intelligence even found its way into the public discourse. And at that point, it made its way from behind the door of psychology rooms and classrooms and therapy into the mainstream. And at that point, there were studies that came out and all of this other information. We realized emotions and emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize, identify, and manage emotions may be the #1 indicator to a child's long-term success. So we used to assume that emotions were not important. You just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you ignore those emotions. But now we know that that can create long-term anxiety and many other issues, health issues, emotional issues as well. We used to believe that bullying was a natural part of childhood and it built character, but perhaps because of the 24-hour news cycle and access to news stories from all over the country and from the world, we know that bullying can have lifelong consequences and it can cause even young children to take their own lives. So bullying is not something that we can just ignore on the backfield of the playground any longer. We have to really address it because it is impactful not only for the victim, but it's a problem for the bully as well. And we used to say to young people, "You are special." We used to use that to build confidence, and in many cases, we still do. However, this technique and approach came out probably in the mid-'80s, and it spread like wildfire in the educational arena, where that's how we built this a kid's confidence, just "you're special." But the problem is a kid has no control over that validation, and they begin to crave it. And because of that, there was a term that was coined called a validation junkie. And so young people who were raised with this, sometimes, I won't say all the time, but oftentimes, went into the workforce and they were still looking for that validation. Whereas in the 1990s, I remember reading this big story about a corporation who hired an HR person who just went around their company validating people. "You're awesome, you're special, you're doing great," because they recognized their young people needed it. So now we know that saying you are special doesn't produce the long-term skills or even that self-identity that is self-perpetuating. If a kid says, "I am special," they don't believe it as much as when somebody else says it. Okay. Wow, I'm just now getting to secret #2 because I'm really enjoying this. Okay, why focusing on solving your child's behavior is not the best thing to do, but that's what most programs focus on, and it has little or no impact on the child, because we look at solving their behavior as if that is the problem, but it's just the symptom, it's just the tip. So I was hired to run a program for Denver Juvenile Court for teenagers that were new into the juvenile system. That's what I was hired to do. And this was a 6-week summer camp, 180 hours. And the first day of class, I realized I was in way over my head, because what they sent me was not young people who were just new to the juvenile justice system. What they sent me were 15 young people who were that were all initiated into gangs already. I quickly discovered they were from rival gangs. They all had violent offenses. So they were all there for having committed some act of violence. And they were each and every one in drug and alcohol treatment. And I thought, this moment is going to make or break my career. And we could very easily end up on the 6 o'clock news if I can't get a hold of it very quickly, because they quickly realized they were from rival gangs. And this was my battle. This was the toughest situation I've ever been in. And it put all of my work to the test. And I discovered that using these tools and techniques, that I could appeal to their assets and their desire to be heroes, because everybody wants to be a hero. And if we can recognize that for them, they can begin to see it. No one believed that this program would be as successful as it is, or as that program was. And at the end, we produced a 90-minute original play called Trading Faces, The Me Nobody Knows. And after the performance, they had a standing ovation from their judges, their probation officers, their families, their friends. And after the show, I have a video of all these young people from rival gangs with their arms around each other. And one of them turns to me and he said, "What I love about this place is that nobody ever gave up on nobody." And the challenge these young people faced is that every other situation they had been in, people were trying to address their behavior. And I was there to build their skills. So someone just said in the chat that they keep losing the connection. If that is a problem for other people, please let me know. We are recording this, so Patty, I can make sure that you get a copy of the video. Okay. So if you have something to write on, okay, I am so sorry. I see that we are about 50 minutes in. Someone else says that they are going in and out of the connection, and I'm so sorry. But as I said, let me know and I will make sure that you get a copy of the video, and my apologies. Okay, at least someone says that their connection is working. So these are the 5 tools, the 5 skills that I specifically focus on teaching using this technique of identity shaping. So this is part of the cheat sheet. Write it down or just remember it. I focus on the Me-Q quotient. Think of IQ, intelligence quotients. There's so many ways to be smart. So the Me quotient is another way to be smart. What do I know about me? Then there's the emotional intelligence, the emotional quotient, as I mentioned, the P and Q, the problem-solving quotient, SQ, social intelligence or the social quotient, and the WeQ or the we quotient. How do we work together as a team? So I see that there are a number of technical issues, and I'm so close. I'm more than halfway through this. So my apologies. If you have technical issues, be sure to let me know. I will make sure that you get a copy of the video. I appreciate your patience. Okay. And it seems like some people are okay with the technology. So I don't know, but I will keep going, and I appreciate your being here. So the Me quotient is me. what do I know about me? And that comes back to that question of who are you? You know, if you were to ask a teenager, why did you do that? And the kid looks at you and they go, I don't know. They are not lying. They really don't know. They don't know why they do these things. They're driven by emotions and impulses and very fast thinking. So if you were to create an instruction manual for a person, it would have to be individualized to each different person because we are all individuals. So the Me Cue is this process of creating that me manual. What makes me different? How and why, and do I do the things that I do, and how can I do them better and more effectively? Because we don't have to be at the mercy of our emotions and our impulses if we understand how we work. I delivered these tools through activities and very short, easy lessons for the adults, and what I call play pages, which are worksheets. If you're working with an older child or a resistant child, I have ways to adapt this, and I work with people to share how to do that. The emotional quotient, again, is this process of recognizing, identifying, and managing emotions, but most of all, it's understanding how emotions work, not only for you individually, but how they kind of work in general, like the fight, flight, and freeze response. We all have that. It's integrated in our genetics, and it's part of our nature. Understanding that gives us more power to respond. So that's just one of the tools and techniques. The social quotient is, how do we relate to other people? How do we make friends? How do we set boundaries with our friends? How do we choose our friends? Choose the friends that are best for us. So, and then how do we communicate? How do we listen? It's all of these elements that are part of that social connection. Problem solving. Very often we are trying to solve the wrong problems. So it's being able to recognize what is the problem that needs to be solved. And it's about asking the right questions. Where do we need to go for questions? Sometimes it's Wikipedia. Sometimes it's your parent, your grandparent, a trusted coach. Sometimes it's really asking yourself, what do I really want and need here? So it's understanding the questions to ask and where to go for those questions. And most of the time, it's not social media. So it is understanding, problem solving, and the quotient for that, and asking questions. And we cue. Do we work together or do we work against each other? That is an important part of our skills building. I mean, as families, as classrooms, as communities, as cultures, as nations, as the world, we've got to work together. So the more skills that our young people have, the more capable they will be in facing the greater challenges that the future holds for them. It is a quickly changing world. I don't need to tell you that in the last 2 years, we have seen the world change dramatically. And we went from the traveling by train and steamboat in the 1890s to space travel today. It's not that long. We see how quickly things can change, and it's very likely that our children will face very dramatic changes in their lifetime, and they're going to need more skills. The youth of today will face unprecedented challenges. They will need heroic problem-solving skills. This program is one way to give young people the tools they need to become the heroes, leaders, and champions they most want to be. And that's the quote from Dr. Philip Zimbardo, the former president of the American Psychological Association. This is the best thing that you can do to have a closer connection with your kid and start working against each other or with each other instead of against each other, and just give you a solid approach on how to do this. So working with the Heroes, Leaders, Champions system will save you time. If you are working with your young person a few minutes a day, once a week, or even once a month as your time allows, you can still get a tremendous amount of benefit from this. I worked with a grandparent who only had occasional contact with his grandchild. He started implementing these tools through texts, and they became closer and closer until over the pandemic, they were communicating more on Zoom. And then when they got back together after the pandemic, the child told his grandfather, "You really get me. You understand me," because he was able to provide a space for this child to really open up and communicate. Using this technique, you are dealing with problems in real time, and you're not ignoring them because you don't know what to do. You will have real-time tools that you can use. Most programs are geared towards the adult, and you have to figure out how to do it and then deliver it to the kid, but this is really geared towards the kid with support for you. And excuse me, it's fun. You can push through any resistance. And let me tell you, if I can push through the resistance of rival gang members, it can work with anyone. And I've never had any young person that this didn't work with, because kids are craving this. It's different from other things that they've done. And we take on skills building head on and problem solving. And you're setting realistic expectations. You're not solving all of the problems. You become a team committed to the process, and you are creating strategies to build bigger and bigger problems so that you're building the strength and the tools to do it. It is a systematic approach. It's like anything else, you get out of it what you put into it, much like a physical health system. This is a mental health system that builds confidence and more resilience. It can save you energy. Problems are harder and if you wait until there is a crisis. And that is probably the biggest challenge that I see, is that very often people don't think about even talking about emotions until they're in the middle of a crisis. And I think of that like trying to teach your child to drive while you're on the interstate and everybody is going 75 miles an hour. We can't wait until there is a crisis to expect our children to learn the process of managing their emotions and problem solving, because the momentum of their emotions or problem solving are going 75 miles an hour and they're caught up in the momentum. So if we build those skills beforehand, then when you're on the interstate, they know what to do. And when you give them instructions, they know how to follow it. Solving problems together helps your child build response ability. They have more ability to respond. And this is geared towards children and how they learn. As I said earlier, kids become role models for other children. My child grew up with this, and she became the go-to person for all of her friends. Whenever they had problems, they would go talk to her because she had a system. Nobody else had a system. So they can become role models for their peers. And in a family, you're working with kids instead of against each other. And if you have a family dynamic that feels stuck, this can help give you more tools to change that dynamic. And it can save you money. I'll give you information about the program and the opportunity to sign up for it in just a moment. But for families who use this program and then find that they need therapy, have increased tools and insights to help therapy be more successful. If you're going in to work with a mental health professional and you are starting from the very beginning, it's just harder. And frankly, it's more expensive. And there are families who've come to me when they're working in parallel with therapists. I've worked with therapists so that they are delivering these tools as well. And I've also had families come to me and say they got out of this program what they were hoping to get from a therapist, because it gave them tools that they could use to really connect and help get through, work through issues with their child. And your child having essential skills is priceless. As I said, every teenager I know right now is having major issues. Many of the young people I know are in high school and in college, and I can't tell you a single one of them that is not having major issues. And the skills that they have are helping, but they all need more skills. Remember the statistic that I told you that said up to 1 in 5 children experienced a mental health disorder in a given year? That cost individuals, families, and societies, get this, $247 billion a year. So it is expensive to try to address those. And just like a physical health problem, if you are eating right and you are exercising, you can avoid the risks of diabetes, for example. It's the same thing. If you are preparing for healthy mental health, you're going to have better mental health. This is not a parenting program. This is not therapy. This is a skills developing program that can support parents, grandparents, teachers, mental health providers, but it's really focused on building these skills and transforming problems into opportunities, conflicts into connections, and frustration into focus. The program includes 5 modules focused on self-awareness, self-control, and focus. That is the MeQ part of it that is focused on identity shaping. SQ, the social intelligence, tools for connection and communication. Emotional intelligence, recognize, identify, and manage emotions. WeQ, that's the team building and leadership, but it also incorporates bullying and helping young people understand the dynamics of power. And the problem response system, that's the P and Q. I offer you easy instructions, and within each one of these 5 modules, you get up to 12 lessons with simple information about it, and then activities that you can use to engage your child. In each one of them, there's a variety of activities that you can use, and you can pick and choose or do them all. As part of the e-learning program, you get 14 ebooks. These are comic books. I call them comic books. They're very quick read. They take very complex concepts and they make it accessible to children as young as 4 or 5 years old, but it's also really complex material. And I can show you how to apply this for older children or even high school at adult level. There are tools for building your family team. There are games and activities to build skills, and these are especially fun with younger children, but I also have activities for older kids as well. I call these play pages, but they're worksheets and they're checklists. And these are just tools to help you really go through the program and it makes it more fun. There are craft templates and powerful problem response tools that you can use in real time. I offer online trainings, online community support, and tools to help you support your child. The program is delivered to you through online access to the e-learning program, support through the online community. This actually doesn't apply. Say 2 modules are available immediately, but now I've opened up all of the modules. They're all available. And you have the early adopter advantage. I'll tell you what this means. It wasn't until June that I made this available to the general public, because until then I had been working exclusively with schools, groups, camps, mental health providers, and I've always known that I wanted to provide this to the general public, and the pandemic gave me the time to get it up there. So when I say you get the early adopter advantage, you get more of my time. I'm the creator of this program. And to be honest, this is the last time that I will make this program available to the general public in this way. I've taken on a certain number of participants at this point, and once I finish this webinar, I will stop this specific offer, but I will continue offering online support, and you will get more of my time. The family that came to me that I mentioned were looking for therapy, their child was in crisis, came to me through a pediatrician, and he was familiar with my work. He had attended classes with his own child, and these parents came to me because they were really worried about their child, and I gave them some tools to use, and within 2 weeks, they came back and said, this training was exactly what we needed. The exercises helped our child to open up again, and we have our little girl back. I can't guarantee that everyone will have that quick of a result, but it's possible. And it was very clear that this child was having emotions she couldn't articulate. And so they're very simple, easy, fun tools to use to help them open up. As I said, I've been doing this for 30 years, and it is absolutely my life's passion. I'm committed to people getting results and to building a community, hopefully a generation of problem-solving champions. So if you have a school group, a camp, if you're a mental health provider, or a group of people who would like to do this as a group, you can contact me as well.